Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Counselling Tutor Podcast, raw recording, episode 265. Whenever you're ready, Rory.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Well, thanks for asking, Rory. Both Rory and I are delighted you've joined us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Episode 265 is where you find us, starting off with theory and practice, where we're going to be looking at what are some barriers to communication. In practice today, we're going to be thinking about setting up your therapy space. How should that look and feel for your clients? And then in practice matters, an interview with Chief Executive of the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. Rory reached out, so we'll be bringing that to you. So starting us off with those barriers to communication, Rory.
Yes. I mean, it's a very basic thing, really, isn't it? You know, counselling is about human communication, one person speaking, one person listening and understanding. And if you can't understand what's being said, then you can't be an effective helper. And there's quite a few barriers to communication, if you think about it. And there's some very, very practical ones. I mean, I've been in counselling rooms where, you know, next door they've been doing building work, and it sounds like a building site, and you can't hear what the clients had to say. So in a case like that, we had to move rooms. We had to move rooms to a different part of the building, which is more quieter. And also language is it can be a big barrier to communication. We live in a very multicultural society now where, you know, people's first language may not be English. And, you know, it's very possible that you may meet somebody whose first language isn't English. So they may not communicate in English as fluidly as you do. So that's a barrier to communication. And then there's other barriers to communication. What about neurodiversity? Where someone's neurodiverse, they may need, special or thoughtful ways of communicating. I've got a friend who's a therapist who's worked with people who are neurodiverse, autism in particular, and she negotiated with the client to sit back to back with them because the client didn't like looking at them, so they sat back to back and spoke that way, and that was very, very useful. So those are some examples. But I think it's something that should be on our mind as therapists. Are there any barriers to communication? And if so, can we reduce those barriers to make it easier for the people that we're working with and serving?
100%. And, you know, you started off by clearly shining a light on the fact that the counselling relationship is a place of communication, whether that is online, whether it's taking place via email or telephone or in a room face-to-face in person. There is a communication aspect. The client is bringing where they're at, and that communication can be verbal, it can be non-verbal, it can be written. So there's many ways of communication. And I turned to the Oxford Dictionary, as one does, Rory, when one's researching for the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and I pulled out the definition of communication. It's the imparting or exchanging of information by speaking, writing, or using some other medium. And here's the bit that matters. It is the successful conveying or sharing of ideas and feelings. So barriers to communication are things that may get in the way of that successful conveying or sharing of those ideas and feelings. And you've kind of touched on it already. Barriers to communication can be external barriers. We'll speak about that more in a moment. So you already mentioned building work that's going on in the room next door. Somebody walking in and interrupting the session. Somebody opening the door and just walking in. Internal barriers, which we'll cover more in a moment. Cultural barriers. Topic barriers. There may be topics that can become a barrier to communication. And then, of course, jargon barriers. So we've spoken about the physical external barriers. That could be somebody working outside, but it could also be a bad connection. If you're working online via an app online, whatever that may be, and you keep on losing the connection, that could be a barrier to that communication. It can be quite frustrating. I don't know how you feel when that happens to you, but me, when everything freezes up and I find myself talking and then looking at the picture on what I use, I sometimes use Zoom to make the meetings and stuff, and everybody seems to be very still, and I'm thinking, are they really there? And then I realize, what have I missed? What did they not get there? The interrupting environmental factors. The room being too hot, too cold. And you spoke about neurodivergence. Rory, I am proudly autistic, and I don't start getting hot. It doesn't happen. So I'm either too hot or too cold. There is my body's ability to say, oh, you're getting a little warmer now, you're getting a little warmer. If I was in a room and suddenly it became too hot for me, I would find it very, very difficult to concentrate on what was happening and be my true self in that room. Cultural barriers, socio-economic class can be a barrier to communication. And I mean, I think you tell a story, Rory, of the Ferrari car parked in the driveway type of idea.
Yes, I mean, you know, you might see someone who looks or feels in a different class to you, you know, and should I be really speaking to them? And you know, that the Ferrari car in the drive, you know, should I be speaking to this person because obviously they're more successful than I am? All these barriers, and I think I'd pick up on topic barriers. Because I think topic barriers, in terms of any space, be it online or in the room, are the ones that can cause us the most trouble. Things about, should I speak about someone's faith position? Should I be curious about someone's faith position? Should I be curious about someone's sexuality or gender preference? Should I be curious about sex? I mean, one of the things that I read recently is therapists are very reluctant to talk about sex to their clients. And the reason for that is they don't want to be embarrassed. They may be embarrassed themselves or embarrassed for their clients, or fear they may embarrass their clients. And I think there should be no topic that is left unexamined in therapy if it comes up for the client. I'm not saying that we go out like some kind of interrogator interrogating clients, every part of a client's life. But if it comes up, we shouldn't audit ourselves to the point where we cannot communicate therapeutically with the clients. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I think there's a rich seam area for work there. When you're speaking about topic barriers to communication, is having a look at what are your triggers, what are your no-go areas, what are the things that embarrass you. My daughter, when she gets embarrassed, she's got red hair and very quite pale skin and lots of freckles. And when she gets embarrassed, she goes bright red and her ears start to glow. And what are those that set you off like that? Are there areas that you don't want to go into? And we can examine that in self. But also, the client may wish to bring something into therapy that they themselves struggle to talk about. It's a difficult topic for them. You mentioned sexuality or sex in general. It's not a topic that we're encouraged to shout from the rooftops and speak about in general conversations, let alone we should now bring this up with someone, a stranger. It can be hard for a client to bring what's really going on in their life if there is an area that embarrasses them and it's difficult for them to speak about. So it's about thinking about how can we be patient and caring and treat what the client says with no judgment whatsoever, and I guess give the space for them to work at their time. But it can be a barrier. So the barriers work both ways. And then we're speaking about topics. When we get onto jargon, I was thinking, Rory, after this podcast, I need to EQ the sound file, upload that to the SQL database, and then grab and here I am talking now jargon. And jargon will fit, there's a group of people that understand a way of speaking, and outside of that group of people, it can be a barrier to communication. It can make no sense at all. If I was to say to you, my biggest problem that I'm struggling with at the moment is my SQL database configurations, you might struggle to know where I am, of course, unless you work in IT and have an understanding of that.
Absolutely, Ken. And in our house, we speak of little else.
SQL databases.
SQL databases. Yeah, and I think obviously dialect is the interesting one. I mean, through the years of teaching, some of the interesting conversations I've had with students and colleagues in general about working with clients who have specific dialects. And I can remember one of my students saying, one of my clients says, I say, how are things? And he says, it's bangers. And she said, I have no idea what that means. And I said, well, it's a Manchester term for not very good. Sometimes you hear in the mill towns where I live, bobbins, which means, again, it was a reference to people who worked in the mills. It's not very good. It's bad. It's bobbins. It's bangers is a popular term. And, dialects. And she said, I had no idea what that meant. And I said, well, you could ask the client. You could say, I hear you say, it's bangers. What does that mean to you? And she said, I never thought of that. I said, well, you could try that. But, it's interesting that even native English speakers, there's so much difference in the English language up and down our little country. Well, we're a very small country. That can be an issue of communication. So clarifying, I think, is a very useful skill to be able, if you're not sure, just clarify. And I want to pick up on the fact that I'm getting more and more colleagues speaking to me saying, services are having to gear up to non-English speakers, but people who are either non-English speakers or people who English is a second language. And that has been a massive sea change in my 20-year career as a therapist. It wasn't something that was talked about that often when I started in services in 2004, 2005. But now it's a common topic of conversation, supplying interpreters, supplying maybe even native speakers in therapy so that they can communicate with people in their own language.
Yeah. And we're speaking language here, but of course, dialect also plays a part. And I recall I came over from South Africa back to the United Kingdom, and I was working in a job. And one of the customers that we were serving was a lovely man in Liverpool, and I couldn't understand a word he was saying. He had a colleague, and I remember saying to his colleague, I'm really struggling to understand him. And the colleague said, yeah, me too, and I'm from Liverpool. But he had a really strong accent, and I really struggled to understand what he was saying. And that kicked, so there was a barrier in communication from the start, but then there was a further barrier to that communication in that it was embarrassing for me to tell him, to say, sorry, I really am struggling to hear you. So two barriers came together, and basically I was smiling a lot and nodding and just hoping that nodding and smiling was, and going, yeah, right, was the right kind of reaction. But there was no shared understanding, or very little shared understanding in that interaction. And that that is common. That happens. That comes up. I know there's for those that watch it, there's a program called Clarkson's Farm, and if you've watched Clarkson's Farm, you will realize within there is a barrier to communication. There's a chap that builds the stone walls and works on the farm that is not understandable, and they return to that character again and again and again. So I guess when we look at what have we learned, so we've learned that barriers can come from the speaker or the listener. It can be us as the counselor, it can be the person coming in. They can be visible or unseen. Sometimes the barriers to communication are not seen by us. Barriers can lead to frustration, misunderstanding, and a client perhaps feeling that they weren't heard. And then I guess it's always, what can we do? There must be something we can do about this. We can study the barriers so we can know what they are and recognize that they exist, revisit them regularly. Think about how you might react if a barrier does show itself within a session. What would you do? How might you handle that? If you brief that at range, so brief it and think about it before you're in a session, then when it comes up in a session, you're prepared. You've gone through this before. And then, and this is a lovely one, look out for what happens in your own life. Learn from stuff that comes up with you when you have a misunderstanding. Maybe if you go to a restaurant and they bring you some food and the food is not 100% to your liking, and the waiter or waitress comes over and says, how's the dinner? If you find yourself go, oh no, it's fine, thank you very much, oh, I'm not coming back here again. What is that? There's a barrier to communication there. Recognize them in our own lives, journal about them, talk about them, take them into supervision, speak to peers, and of course get into the Facebook group and have a chat about them there.
Absolutely, Ken. And just one final point on that.
Yeah.
CPD. If there are areas that you're struggling with, certainly things like understanding maybe diverse communities or sexualities or gender, get the CPD on it to get a better understanding of it. Because I think sometimes having CPD, being in a space where you can ask questions, not to the client, but to a trainer and say, well, what about this? What about that? How does this work, is very, very useful, because ultimately the client shouldn't be teaching us. We should be reasonably equipped to work with clients. They shouldn't spend their entire therapeutic hour effectively just teaching us or trying to communicate with us. We should be able to do the reaching out.
Yeah, part of your CPD, I would suggest go and get the super duper handout that Rory has made for this session. It's called the Barriers to Communication Cheat Sheet, and it covers the environmental distractions, cultural differences, emotional barriers, the physical difficulties, labels, stereotyping, listening, lack of communication skills, use of jargon, lack of sensitivities, technology gaps, not listening. There's a whole rich seam there of CPD, and it's free. If you want to get that, go to counselingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, find your way to episode 265. Right there in the show notes, you can download Rory's super duper cheat sheet on barriers to communication. I have to put in, Rory, that it's not really cheating, is it? Cheat sheet. It's just a word that we use. I know we've had letters before, haven't we?
No letters in the post bag, please.
No letters say you're encouraging people to cheat. It's a quick reference, I guess. Yes. That's what it is. So there you have it. That is our theory in practice for today. Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. Moving in to practice today, contemporary issues, wins, things that happen in counselling, things that we are coming across today in our day-to-day running of a counselling practice. And today, setting up your therapy space, Rory. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in this one. Let's go.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of interest in this in our Facebook group. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. Our friendly moderator will let you in, and you can join thousands and thousands of like-minded people all talking about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And you will be among students, qualified colleagues, supervisors, trainers, and people who are just talking about many, many different topics. But this is a evergreen subject, setting up a therapy space. And it's an important one because it is where you work either corporeally, I'm using a big word today, that's face-to-face corporeally, or online. Because if you're an online therapist, you could be working online, and your therapy space effectively would be your backdrop, the way you communicate, your lighting, all those would make up your therapy space. But I think there is a lot to consider when setting up a therapy space. And I think that I draw on a reference from a book, and please don't ask me which book it is because I've long forgotten it. But it said that the therapy space should enact a permission for the client to cry if they want to. It should be so safe that they can bring, even the deepest emotions into it. And I think that's a really good starting point. Is it a place of safety? Is it a place that enacts permission?
Yeah. I'm thinking back to my counselling studies and an exercise that we were given to do in groups of designing our therapy room. And I remember, it was beautiful, Rory. I remember us then standing up in front of the rest of the peers and saying what our therapy room had in it, and it had lovely couches and chairs. And then I remember the reality of going into my first placement, and I was in a very bland room with some plastic chairs, and it was interesting. And I was so glad of going through that setting up the therapy room exercise when I found myself there, and I went into supervision and worked with my supervisor, and eventually that little bare room that it started off with became a beautiful, safe place where clients shared their journey. I learned lots, they learned lots. It was something beautiful that I think back on now. And I think that we can look at a room and go, this is no good for therapy. And there are things that are going to make it no good for therapy. One, can somebody walk past, look in a window and go, look, I wonder what they're talking about? Not good for therapy. You mentioned it, Rory. It's got to be a safe place. Clients are bringing their information. They expect confidentiality. If you're in a room with 5 other people and you've got these office dividers up, is that appropriate for therapy? No, you can be overheard over the room divider. Maybe in some instances you can be heard through the walls, and if you're in a room, I know that I think you shared this, Rory, and I certainly did it, when going and looking for practice rooms, you'll go inside and talk, get someone to go inside and talk and stand outside and listen. Can you hear anything? If you can, then it's not there. So, of course, when we're talking about setting up your therapy space, we're looking at confidentiality. But then we also kind of need to broaden that a little. We need to look at physical accessibility. Is this accessible for all people? And if it's not, because sometimes it is not, we need to be able to state that so that we don't land up in a situation where a person arrives to see us and then is unable to access the room. And I had such a thing happen to me. I worked in private practice. I ran from my home. I had a spare room upstairs, but there were stairs. And if you weren't able to go up the stairs, then we weren't going into that therapy room. So you need to consider that physical accessibility. And then, we speak about neurodivergence. When we're looking at neurodivergence, we need to look at sensory accessibility as well. So we spoke about barriers to communication. Maybe the room is too hot or too cold. That would be sensory. Is there something noisy in the room, like a ticking clock? Is there a light that flickers within the room? So if someone is neurodivergent, chances are that might not sit well with them. And of course, as always, we ask, when we have our room and it's set up and the client's there, we ask them, is this comfortable for you?
Absolutely can. And, you know, access to, you know, a toilet.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people sometimes say, "Oh, I've got a garden and I'm going to put a nice shed in for a therapy room." And you know, my question always is, well, if the client wants to go to the toilet, and sometimes I don't want to get too deep into this, but sometimes when people are talking about trauma, the physicality of talking about it can promote the fact that they might need to use the bathroom. They may need to use the bathroom, and we have to be aware of that. And also, you know, for colleagues who, you know, may practice in prisons and or schools, and the reason I lump them together is they have one thing in common. A lot of them now have CCTV cameras. Mm-hmm. Certainly when I was a school counsellor, the year before I left, they were talking about putting a camera in any space bigger than a metre square, which would have been my therapy room. And I'm not sure how I would have dealt with that. As it happens, I left before that was installed. But that's not unusual now. And I can understand the principle of it, safeguarding in both cases. Yeah. It's a safeguarding thing. But, you know, I don't know how I'd feel about counselling with a camera in the corner. You know, and more to the point, how would my client feel about being counselled with a camera in the corner? So all these things have to be taken into consideration. There's some interesting research that's been done. And part of that was the clients reported that having a neat room was important to them. That it didn't go in and it was a mess. Yeah. You know, stuff strewn all over tables and you know, having to lift, you know, a ton of books off a seat and sit down there and, you know, find a cup under another ton of books. So neatness is really important. And of course, cleanliness, making sure that it's clean, which doesn't mean having very strong smells. That's the other thing for people who are neurodiverse. Very strong smells might be an issue. So there's a lot to think about, I think, Ken, when you're setting up your therapy space, isn't there?
Yeah. And I guess there are times when you have the luxury of designing a beautiful therapy space and you can think about it, where you're going to position the chairs, what kind of clocks you're going to use, where the tissues might be placed. And you can go through all of that thinking, and it's really exciting. And we see it in the Facebook group. You've called out, join that Facebook group, Rory. We see all the time of, I'm going to IKEA and I'm buying my furniture, and here's some pictures of my new setup. And it's a very exciting process to go through. And of course, you're going to have your considerations list as you're doing that. But there are also times where you're going to find yourself, as you said, Rory, maybe working in a school, maybe working in a prison, maybe working in a place where you don't have this ideal setup. And it's what can you do in that kind of an environment. So I'm going to go right back to my placement. I was working at a GP surgery in placement within the NHS. And the only room they had was a room that wasn't being used. It had some chairs piled in one corner. There were the little plastic chairs with and I put them down, and that first time it was kind of quite bleak within that room, and in going to supervision worked out that I can take a little bag with me, and in that little bag eventually was a little rug that I would roll out, and I'd put the chairs onto a little rug and just make it feel a little bit more inclusive, welcoming. But I was very clear when a client arrived to set the safety elements. I would say, this room has been specially allocated. Nobody can hear anything that is said in this room. It is kind of soundproof. We've checked that. Nobody will be disturbing us or knocking on the door, so this is your time. And what I recognized was that the room disappeared. When we got into the narrative, the room completely vanished. It was them and me. We were in session. And the next time I would see the room was after they'd left and I was doing my notes. I would see the room again. Otherwise, it just disappeared. And hopefully for clients, it will disappear as well. And I guess that's one of the things that you're mentioning there, Rory. You don't want anything that is going to call attention to itself again and again and again. Loud ticking clock, really strong smelling room deodorizer that keeps on going. every 30 seconds or whatever it may be. Those are the definite considerations there.
Yes, and I think also one of the things that's sometimes not really spoken about is if you have to change rooms. So I would always say to clients when I met them, face to face, I would say, is this room okay? And they go, yeah. I'd check the room was okay. Things like mirrors. I think thinking about, if the client says, I don't like seeing myself, making sure the mirrors are turned inwards, or making sure there's no reflections, or, really, or as you say, someone says, I really struggle with ticking clocks, remove the clock and use a digital clock that doesn't tick. Making sure you set that up first, and so it's ready for the client. And if you have to change rooms, again, ask the question, is this room okay? Because sometimes if you're working in a busy practice, they may allocate different rooms to different therapists, and you may not use the same room every time. But just as a matter of course, just saying, I'm aware we're in a different room today. Is this okay for you? And, offering that as a kind of precious thing to them, say, I realize we've moved the space. Are you all right with that? And most people, in fact, everybody I've ever had to move room has said, yes, that's fine. And I guess the same thing goes for working online. If you're working online, you have a backdrop. And if you are moving, you're going to be moving, maybe you move to different places, maybe worth having a digital backdrop so that it's consistent. A good quality digital backdrop. So in other words, it's like a green screen behind you, and you just have a backdrop, because that can be a bit of a shock. Some clients may not, they come into the online room and see that you're in a different space. That can be triggering. So there's lots to think about, I think, about setting up a therapy space, isn't there?
Yeah, I love that you opened the door to the digital world there. And I think that deserves a podcast all on its own, to be honest with you, because there is so much you can do with your backdrop if you are working online to create that same safe, inclusive, welcoming feeling. But it does take a little bit of thinking about. And it's interesting that we will maybe consider spending quite a bit of money setting up a physical in-person therapy room. But when we go and look at a green screen online and it's £140, it's like, oh, that's too much. I think that there's some mileage in making your digital practice, putting the same kind of thought and effort into your digital practice that you would into your face-to-face, in-person, in the room practice. But there it is. That is practice today, setting up your therapy space. I wonder what you have in your therapy space, or if you're a student and you're planning to go into practice, what would you like yours to look like? Get into that Facebook group. Rory's invited you, and have that chat. And I've seen pictures of people's therapy rooms in the Facebook group as well. So if you're happy to take a picture, put it in. And it kind of leads me to one thing I wanted to say a little earlier, is be careful of what you have on your walls in your therapy room, like pictures of family, or, you wouldn't particularly want to give away too much of who you are or your faith position or anything like that in the ornaments or the decoration of your room. You want it to be, I don't want to say bland, neutral, I guess is the word. Neutral is the word for that. So that's practice today. Moving on into our practice matters. And this is, you can claim this for CPD. This is where we take a peek and we look at what does a professional body do. And Rory, you reached out to National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, and you spoke to their chief executive, Jyles, from the NCS.
Yes, it's the last of an interviews, a series of interviews, 6 interviews that we've done in the podcast. talking to and looking behind the curtain of a professional body, sometimes referred to as ethical body, the National Counselling Society. If you're listening in the future, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapeutic Society. And we join in this episode by Jyles Robillard-Day, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the National Counselling Society, who does a roundup to talk about all the aspects of the organisation, and I guess to give it to give a view from his seat as the Chief Executive Officer. I spoke with him, and this is what he had to say.
Practice matters.
And we welcome Jyles Robillard-Day, who is the CEO of the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, who's going to give us a sum up, a little bit of a retrospective of the podcasts and the interviews we've done, pulling the curtain back on a professional body. So, Jyles, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Rory, thank you very much for having me today. And thank you really for inviting our team along to talk to you and do this series, because I think it's really, really important that people understand what the professional bodies are, not just ours, but all professional bodies in the PSA accredited register program. So thank you so much for having us. And I really hope that it's helped your listeners, but it's answered some questions, and it's sort of let them understand what we all do and why we do it.
Yes, I certainly was enlightened. I thought naively that I possibly knew what professional bodies did. But by the end of this series, and just to remind people, we effectively started with the special edition, which was broadcast on the 1st of April 2023. And then episodes 260 right through to this episode, Jyles, which is I'm just having a look at my broadcast sheet, 265, all feature a section from the National Counselling Society with your colleagues speaking about the different functions that they undertake within that society, either supporting members or supporting general members of the public. And if you are listening, hang on to the end, because Jyles got a bit of a special announcement for those of you in private practice. I think you're going to like this. So it strikes me, Jyles, that there's a lot going on in the organisation.
Yeah, no, thank you. There's loads going on. I think the first thing I'd like to do, if I could, is just sort of sum up, I think, the key points of what we do and what our team have been talking about to your listeners. First and foremost, our role is to support our members on their journey. We very much view counselling and psychotherapy as a vocation, and we want to support people as they go through that process. And that can be from training to doing CPD, to having a really strong ethical framework and ethical support. I mean, something I'm so proud of as CEO is what a responsive team we have. And the amount of feedback we get from our membership is how quickly people get back to them, how personal it is, and how we really try to help the individual, any questions they have throughout their process. And then obviously we have lots of benefits for our members, like a wonderful magazine and special offers, etc. For me, the second part, and a very key part, which I know we talked about in one of the podcasts, is public protection. So, and I won't go into all the details, I know Meg has already talked about it earlier, but it is a non-statutory regulated profession at the moment. So it's really important with the PSA accreditation system that the members of the public and users know that there's a really strong governance system in place, that they're working with ethical and well-trained practitioners. But really importantly, there's a robust complaints process, so that if there is an issue, which hopefully there isn't, but when there are, there's a really robust, fair, transparent complaints process for people to follow. And it's something I'm really proud of, again, is that we've rewritten our complaints process in the last year or so to really make it accessible to all, and to do something which we've talked about called consensual disposal, which is just trying to make it an easy process for people to go through if they have to. Because if you bring a complaint, you don't want to have a stressful, you want to de-stress that situation as much as possible. So that's the second sort of one, is really that public protection. And to me, the third and equally important part is promoting the skills of our members in particular, but also the benefits of counselling and psychotherapy in the round. So through that, I think Faye talked about our organizational membership, how we really try to link up with organizations, not just in the counselling space, but in the mental health space, to see how we can work together to promote the benefits of counselling and psychotherapy to the public. And then also Meg has talked about our campaign work. So we're currently campaigning at the moment to try and ensure access to counselling for all children and young people, because as everyone knows, there is a crisis at the moment, and it's how can we get support to those that need it. And then the other campaign we're doing is direct access to counselling, which again, I know Meg's talked about, but allowing people who are seeking support for their mental health choice of the counsellor they have, choice of where they receive that counselling, rather than a didactic, oh, you must have it in this place at this time with this person. And I think that's really, really important, because the therapeutic process and the relationship that is created between counsellor and client is unique to each and every individual. And it really is making sure that people can have the opportunity to match the right person. So those, I suppose, Rory, are what hopefully our team have talked about, really supporting members on their journey, public protection, and promoting the skills of our members skills of our members and the benefits of counselling and psychotherapy. So that hopefully is what we've been talking about.
It is. It's a wonderful summary, Giles. And there were some areas which I found particularly striking, and I guess picking up on the last point when I spoke to Meg regarding campaigns and the idea that there's literally an army of trained, highly qualified, ready to go therapists to help out in this mental health crisis. All we need is someone to come along and open that resource up, and it strikes me things could be so much better. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the research backs up that client choice and that the relationship is a massively important part and ingredient in positive outcomes in therapy. I think this one size fits all sometimes just doesn't work at all. And I guess also the fact that you're a campaigning organisation, you speak to power and you put these issues in front of those people who can actually make the decisions. The hired help, as I like to call them, who we elect every 4 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Rory. We campaign across all 4 governments of the United Kingdom. We've done a lot of work recently with Faye has in Northern Ireland to raise our presence and to offer support there. We sit on numerous APPGs. We provide information and guidance to government, because we are, I think what about the NCS is we are passionate about what we do, and we absolutely believe it in our core. We believe in the benefits of what our members can provide. And you're quite right, there's approximately 60,000 qualified counsellors and psychotherapists on the PSA accredited register as we speak today. If you look at figures from government, they will tell you they need to employ another 5, 6, 7,000 therapeutic practitioners to work in the IAPT service, which is brilliant. IAPT has its place, and CBT has its place, but there's this untapped resource of fully qualified, accredited counsellors waiting to support. Our latest research, I think, which Meg talked about, is that a lot of counsellors have a 2-week or less waiting time for space. So the support's there. So when you hear about someone waiting a year to access support, it's really frustrating. But I know I've got skilled and trained members in my organisation, but in also other PSA accredited organisations ready to support the public and ready to support those in need. And I just hope that through our campaign work, we can make a change, because it needs to happen.
Yes, and I think it's really interesting. I've just done a little Google while you were talking, and the British Army have, as of 2022, have 79,380 active personnel. So at 60,000, that's almost the strength of an army, ready to fight a campaign against poor mental health, sitting, waiting waiting to go. And I think when you put those numbers into perspective and the issues that we can see every day in our society where people need mental health support, it's only right that, you know, professional bodies like yourself speak to power and try and harness, you know, the energy and the power and the commitment of those people who are willing to serve.
Roy, something I want to add to that. I really think that, you know, counsellors and psychotherapists are often the unsung heroes because, you know, we hear a lot about, certainly with CYP, I'm talking about, we hear about CAMS and, you know, we all know we're underfunded at the moment, and we hear about new mental health support teams and child and wellbeing practitioners at the other end. Very, very good. But we don't hear about the counsellors and psychotherapists working with children and young people, holding that middle space, day in, day out, and the support they offer and the change they offer young people's lives. And it's not promoted enough. It's not rejoiced in, if I can put it that way, because they really are, in my humble opinion, the unsung heroes of mental health at the moment, and more should be done. And that's why we're campaigning. So actually, let's promote and rejoice in and use this resource because it's there and it's ready.
Absolutely. They're in the barracks, to use an army analogy, ready to go, fully trained, fully kitted up. And we just need, through the all-party parliamentary groups, which is what you mentioned, the APPGs, for someone to take leadership in government and say, look, let's release this powerful resource and let's have maybe less emphasis on crisis intervention and more early intervention.
Absolutely. It's early intervention, and it's, you know, there's so much research, Rory, and we sponsored a report for an APPG in 2018, so a long time ago now, showing the financial benefit, if I can put it into hard, cold numbers, of offering support early. You know, it's a well-known fact, but I think it's 75% of mental health issues are bedded in by 18, and I think 50% by the age of 12, I think it is. But we did a report showing the cost benefit to the society if you want to put it in cold, hard numbers. And it's there in black and white. Early support, it helps people and it helps our country in the long term, you know, and government for correct reasons have to look at money. They have to look at the finances and how they pay for things. And there's so much evidence that you put the resource in now, you pay, you know, you put the resource in, you put that early intervention in, and the savings in financial terms, and it's a hard way to look at it, but the savings in financial terms, long term, are huge. And it's just, yeah. So we will keep campaigning, Rory. We will keep doing what we can do. We'll keep supporting our members and the public, and hopefully affect a change.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we talked about the cold hard numbers and also the cold hard facts of people who may take their own life, people who may become ill and not be able to work or contribute to their families, and to have this resource of highly trained, motivated people accountable to the general public, ready to go at a moment's notice, on the whistle, if you like. Seems a no-brainer. So if there is anybody from the government listening to the podcast, not that I suspect anybody from our government does listen to our podcast, but if someone should or you know, if someone could just pass our podcast on to those in power, I think that'd be useful. But yeah, it's a call to action, and I like particularly one of the things that, you know, sometimes goes, I guess, unrecognised, is that protection to the public is about confidence, isn't it? To pick up on one of your points, sometimes people are worried about going to therapy. They don't know maybe what they're going to get. Having a professional body, depending on, you know, there's lots of professional bodies out there, but from a general principle point of view, being accountable to a professional body does give the general public confidence, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It gives confidence that as Meg would have talked about, that the counsellor they're going to see is trained, is ethical, but also should anything go wrong, there is this robust complaints process. And something, we campaign, Rory, as I said earlier, that we want to promote the benefits of counselling and psychotherapy. So we campaign for people to use counsellors and psychotherapists on an accredited register. We don't say just NCS, because we want the benefit to the public of all 60,000 of those counselors and psychotherapists, whatever accredited body they're with. I think that's really key, So the other thing where I would say in our campaigning, we will be producing templates for people to write to their local MPs with. So over time, we'll be sending that out, and hope your listeners and our members can look out for that to help us in that campaign.
Yeah, speak to the hired help, absolutely, and get some action there, because it seems like this is a very grassroots driven initiative.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One final thing, you talked in your first point about being very member led, being thoughtful of the members, and actually you've got a little bit of a special service that you're offering members. I wonder if you could tell us what that is.
Yeah, of course, Rory. Because I know we're coming to the end of our podcast, before I come down, just to remind your listeners, we are about to change our name to a National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society after a vote of our members. We are a very democratic society. We're so excited. We're going to be launching a new website soon with really great functionality, both for our members, but also for those seeking support. They'll be able to search our registers and our specialist registers to find people. So keep an eye out for that. But there was a trial done by the PSA at the end of last year on how can people in private practice obtain an enhanced DBS check. And that trial, and I'll try and make it as simple as possible, that trial was done with a company called Inkerman. And we've, since that trial, worked with Inkerman, who are an umbrella organization who can facilitate enhanced DBS checks. And I'm really glad to say we're about to start offering our members that service. Now, it's nothing, if you like, we're just a middleman. We're just giving that link. So we've done a special deal with Inkerman, who will run the process and do the systems to enable our members in private practice to get an enhanced DBS check. There is a cost to it, and off the top of my head, I think it's about £56. We as the NCS are not involved. We just provide the contact details, so we're not making money out of it. Likewise, we're not saying people have to have it, but it's something I know for years we've had members asking us, how can I get it if I don't work for a specific organization? Well, I'm glad to say, after the PSA trial and after us working with Inkerman, we're now going to be able to offer that. So we're going to have a link on our website in the next week for people who want to get an enhanced DBS check. They can go directly to this company called Inkerman, who've been set up by us as an umbrella organization. But really key, the two key points for me, Rory, are it's a service we're sort of being the middleman on, and we set up, and we're not making money out of it, and it's not a requirement. You don't have to have one if you don't want to, but if you want to, it's a great resource, hopefully.
It is a great resource, and I think from a kind of commercial point of view, to have that on your website as a therapist or on your socials or in your listings, is going to give even more confidence and give, obviously, accountability. And if you want that link and you want to get it from the Counselling Tutor website, go to Counselling Tutor, go to podcast episode 265, and we'll pop that link in the show notes. And as you say, we're not involved with it at all, Counselling Tutor, apart from supplying the link, and very, very useful, because DBS checks have notoriously been difficult to get as a private, non-employed practitioner. So a great service there. I have to say, I'm thoroughly enjoyed meeting all your colleagues, Jyles, hearing about the work they've done, the passion of the work, the regional issues, the making sure there's a fair and accountable process in complaints, and the general campaigning. It's been a real joy. So, Jyles Robillard-Day, thank you so much for joining us.
Rory, thank you very much, and speak again.
Big thank you to Jyles. Big thank you to the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. Thank you to you, Rory, for reaching out, hosting that interview and bringing us the information of what happens in a professional body. This has been episode 265 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, and we started off with theory and practice. We talked about those barriers to communication. And of course, there's a super duper handout. If you go to Counselling Tutor, our mother website, episode 265, you can get that handout. In practice today, we talked about setting up your therapy space, both in the room and online. We touched on some useful observations there. And then finally, we caught up with Jyles Robillard-Day, Chief Executive of the National Counselling, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, who rounded up our series of interviews with members of their staff on what a professional body does. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counsellor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counsellor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.